Today I'm sharing my part 2 video blitzing through a ton of PvP tips that you should be doing in the Crucible, and without wasting any time, let's get right in. Tip number 1, all about the radar. This one might actually be the longest tip of them all today, but it's very crucial. Everyone knows it's important to pay attention to the radar, but I really want to point out just how much information this thing can give you. First off, the radar has ranges. If someone's within 5 meters of you, it'll take up that middle circle. Between 6 and 23 meters, it'll use that donut portion of the radar, and then from 24 meters all the way to 48, it'll ping a little thin ring around the radar in the direction that they are. To put these numbers into some kind of visual context, I've taken the burnout map and I've actually overlaid a transparent circle on there that's to scale to show you just how much you can actually see so that you can remain in control of positioning management. Now there's different ways that the radar will light up too. Inside that 5 meter range, if someone's on the same vertical level as you, it'll start flashing that middle circle like I talked about. But if they're below you or above you, it'll actually just boldly fill out the outer edge of that inner piece. Now with respect to the donut part, it also has 2 variations, but admittedly this one takes a little bit of practice to start noticing subconsciously. If they're on your level, it'll be brighter towards the middle, like the center of the circle, and it'll have a gradient heading outwards, becoming less and less bold. Whereas if they're on a floor above you or below you, it'll actually be bolder on the outside of that donut with the transparent gradient headed towards the center. Lastly, for all cases of pinging on the radar, if your opponent crouches, it'll actually take them off of your radar, meaning your radar won't show anything for a moment rather than just staying solid on your screen. All right, tip number 2. If you're a Titan, let's say you've put up your barricade for a moment and someone's pushing you really hard. What most opponents do is they'll jump over and shotgun you from above. Well, your shield is actually curved and can protect you a lot more than you think. I've found a ton of success by timing my slide right through my shield as they're jumping over. We basically end up trading spots, but they don't typically expect you to do it, so then you've taken over control of the play. I'll usually turn around while I'm doing it and shotgun them from the back, then jump over and finish them off with my primary, or you'd just be surprised how often their feet actually clip the top of that barricade and make them one shot, so they're an easy kill. A pro tip for the bottom tree strikers out there is that if that does happen, your knockout perk will proc, and then you can just melee them from like a football field away. All right, tip number 3. It's actually a basic video setting. When I'm allegedly testing out god rolls for my friends for content, I notice a shocking amount of people with motion blur turned on. I definitely recommend turning this off. I personally find that in moments of chaos during PvP where I'm trying to look for my opponents, it's 10 times easier to do it when this motion blur setting is turned off. Tip number 4. Baiting other people's decisions, or I guess you could call this one misdirection. I'm always thinking of this statement in my head. What do they think that I'll do? When you're in something called the flow state, another topic that I really want to cover in the future someday, things like this actually happen naturally, but sometimes I just need to force myself to think of something out of the ordinary that I know will throw my opponent off. Probably the most basic example that comes to mind is like pretending to go one way but then going the other. So let's just say you're in a fight, you've got cover between the both of you, make it look like you're going to peek on the right and then re-engage them on the left. I took a look at my clips from just the last couple of days and I found one little subtle example, but it's still a good case. Here when I'm in the fight, I slide down to the left and I make it look like I'm going to keep going in that direction and re-engage them from there. Then I actually back up and I start looking for them, knowing that they're probably going to be looking the other way. They actually still managed to hit me before I killed them, but I think this is why I won the fight. Number 5 is a couple of hunter movement tips I thought of. First off, I recommend you use strafe jump. It gives a strong boost with really good directional control, and you can use plenty of map environment around you to get moving very quickly. Let's say you're running through an area with a low ceiling. Well, there's a technique that you can use where you first hit your jump button, and then when you're as close to the ceiling as possible, that's when you want to hit your jump button again, which is the boost, essentially bouncing yourself off of the ceiling and getting a bunch of forward momentum. I do this on pretty much every opportunity I have, and once you get the hang of it, you'll actually start to learn how to do it on little thin doorways as well. Let's say someone's chasing me through this tunnel on dead cliffs. Well, when I bounce off of this exit here, I can get a lot of space between the two of us and I'm a lot more ready. Another thing you can do is use downward staircases. The last video I made showed you how to warlock boost off of upward staircases, but for hunters, let's say you're in the air, if you land on a downward staircase and hit jump again right away, it'll actually launch you really far forward. This one's definitely less common, but I use it on Widow's Court and Javelin a lot. Lastly, tapping jump versus holding jump will actually change how high you go, and this isn't just a controller thing. My mind was blown away by this in D1 when learning the King's Fall raid, jumping from those circle platforms. Even with the spacebar in D2, if you hold it versus tap it, you'll go a little bit higher. All right, tip number 6 is a keybind. My use button is F, but the problem with that is I can't strafe to the right if I'm getting a res in trials, for example. So I highly recommend finding a button in the alternate keybind section that will allow you to strafe while getting a res. I can reach caps lock with my pinky really easily. Some people like to use alt. For controller folks, I'm not actually sure what the best case would be for you because I owned a Scuff back when I played D1. But if there's any ideas, definitely help each other out in the comments. Another pain point that I've had with Destiny is actually trying to bind one button to two different items. Like let's say you wanted to have your Hunter, Dodge, and Shadow Dive both be the same button. Well, in game, you can't actually do that. What's cool though is how easy it is to change on the computer if you really want to. The text on screen shows you a file path. I'm not sure where it is for Mac, but for Windows, if you copy and paste that into the little search icon on the taskbar, it'll show you an option to open up the folder where you're going to find something called the CVARs file. For those on Mac, you can probably just Google Destiny 2 CVARs file location and you should be fine. Make a copy of these two files, put them on your desktop, somewhere where you can grab it and put them back if you need to later on. But all you're going to have to do is just right click the XML file, hit edit, and it's going to open up into a text box. I scroll down to the part where it says air move and then class ability, and I just make sure that they both have the exact same keybind in there. So I will literally copy paste my class ability, put it into air move, save it and close it, and then go and reboot my game. Now you can see on screen that it's showing the same button for both keybinds and it works. Okay, on to number 7, the player feed, or maybe it's kill feed. Anyways, try and pay more attention to this. If you're brand new, I wouldn't really worry about it as much because you should be focusing on your aim and your movement. But once you're comfortable with that, the kill feed shows you a lot of information, like when someone picks up heavy or what kind of heavy weapon that they have. But today I want to talk more about just learning who your opponents are. Have you ever watched a Walla video and he somehow always knows who he's up against and what they're using? All he's doing is paying very close attention to every gunfight he's in, whether he wins or loses. And then he starts to build a relationship between the character model and the player name and what they're using later on so that he always knows what he's up against. This can be hugely advantageous. The easiest example I could think off the top of my head right now is probably in Trials of Osiris. Like let's say you're up against another team that has 1 sniper and 2 shotguns. Make note of the sniper's name so that when they go down on the kill feed, you and your team know immediately that it's much safer to peek. Or let's say they're the last ones alive. Well, now you know you can play significantly more aggressive because they don't have a shotty. Tip number 8 kind of follows this last one, and it's all about trusting your teammates. One of the best things that my friend Mello ever told me once when we lost a crucial round in Trials was, Castle, if you say go, I am all in, no question. He had such extreme trust in my callouts that instead of second guessing me and hesitating, then being late to the play, he'd always be right there when I needed his help to clutch up whatever scenario it was. There's nothing more frustrating than a teammate who constantly baits you or hesitates and doesn't trust you on your callouts. Interestingly enough, it's actually one of the leading indicators for when people start to tilt in video games. So hold each other accountable without getting too angry and you'll start team chemistry developing a lot faster. Number 9 is a tip all about routine. Just the other day, someone actually asked me for advice on their hand cannon shot because some days they felt like they were on fire, but then other days they felt like they couldn't hit water out of a boat. I'm paraphrasing here, but I think we all have these days. Even the pros do. Something many elites do to bring their A game to an event, for example, is routine. Here's Sidney Crosby, one of the greatest NHL players of all time, with video feed from different dates. Notice how in sync his pre-game ritual is. Getting a routine down drives immense amounts of consistency and helps balance out all of those bad days. Sleep is also one of the #1 contributors to being inconsistent when it comes to performance, but for the sake of this tip, we're talking about routine, and what you could do is hop into patrol, shoot some PvE enemies for like 10 minutes before hopping into the Crucible. You could make that your routine every single time, or maybe it's playing 2 Rumble matches before you jump into a trial session. Whatever floats your boat, just find something and stick to it. Tip number 10 is playing without fear. I know this one is obviously more conceptual, but it's by far the #1 thing that has helped me improve across all first-person shooters. Once I stopped being afraid of making mistakes or dying in a video game, I found myself trying new things, developing new mechanical skill, gaining confidence, and learning what does and doesn't work. A nice cycle can emerge because when your confidence is up, you actually make decisions faster. And when you're making faster decisions, even if they're not the best, you will almost always have a better result than hesitating and being too late. Try even being a little bit cocky just on the inside, telling yourself you're about to clutch up. Even if you don't succeed, I guarantee your odds are higher. Okay, number 11. Oh right, I forgot one more hunter movement tip. Sorry to my controller folks out there, but for my mouse and keyboard users, I set my alternate jump keybind to the mouse wheel. Swiping the wheel on Hunter will actually give you this sort of in-between jump that's really consistent, and it's not too low or too high. First couple of examples that come to my mind are here on Widow's Court, getting on top of this shack or whatever on the roof. And then on Dead Cliffs, if you ever want to get up on Jump Up, I can do this off to the right and keep this box as cover. Tip number 12, Icarus mods. I feel like everyone knows how good these are, but just in case you don't, this mod helps your gun be accurate in the air. It's not that people use this because they're out there trying to get as many kills in the air as they can. It's mostly because when you're in a gunfight and someone's trying to run away from you, you'll have to jump over an object and try and finish them off before they get behind cover. Or let's say you need to backpedal on someone who's rushing you right away. You need your bullets to hit them while you're backpedaling in the air. Tip number 13 is actually a pretty hot topic right now. I call this one ADS sliding, and every single player at the top of the PvP food chain does this. First, let me explain the benefits, and then I'll mention what the Bungie patch is doing to it. Let's say you're behind cover. You could ordinarily strafe out to shoot someone. Well, there's a stronger alternative, which is called ADS sliding. Here's a side-by-side where on the left, I'm kind of running, I'm hitting the slide button, then I'm starting to look at where I want to aim, and then I'm ADSing to try and hit my shot, versus the right-hand side where I'm doing it kind of all at the exact same time. The only difference is I'm just hitting those inputs really quickly. Sprint, slide, ADS. This does a couple of things. Number one, it lets you get your aim ready as soon as possible while your character model is sliding out of cover. A crucial part of being a good aimer is actually just good crosshair placement. Number two, it gives you more vision. That sounds kind of crazy, but look at this example that I just showed you. If I slide to my left and then aim, then ADS, look at this freeze frame showing what's in my field of view. Now with the ADS example on the right-hand side, imagine my character basically staying fully standing, but still sliding. The game is giving me the field of view as if my head were up top, even though my character is sliding. Thirdly, your opponents don't actually see it that way either. If you ADS slide around a corner, they will see your character model as if you're sliding low to the ground, which makes it harder for them to hit. Even more important is when you're doing it at different elevations, meaning they can't see you, but you can see them. Now for the Bungie patch that I mentioned, in Season 15, they're actually making it so that if your character is sliding, and I'm not talking this special mechanic, just sliding in general, you now have a base nerf to all of your weapons for that window of time. Over the course of that slide, your weapon will now have 20 less stability, and if you get hit by your opponent, which is inevitable because if you're challenging someone with a primary, you can't one-shot them, they will actually flinch you 50% more than what you're already used to today. Lastly, the third bullet point they show is one that I fully support. It's where the pellet spread is going to be 15% wider on shotguns. I'm pretty happy about that change because that'll take care of a lot of the straight lining apes with a shotgun. I'm just not a big fan of nerfing primary weapons in general, so I feel like those two bullet points on the slide were kind of useless. All right, on to tip number 14. This one is kind of funny and it's similar to number 4. It's another example of misdirection, but I still think it's important, so I'm bringing it up anyways. Let's say you're in a standstill with someone, like you know they're right around the corner and you guys are both kind of trying to figure out what to do. I will always laugh when I walk away, shoot my gun in a different direction like once or twice. They almost always think that I'm in a fight with someone else and then they come in and just rush me. But because I was faking it, I'm already ready for them to do that because I'm expecting it, and then I can put them down fairly easily. It's just a fun little one that I thought I'd share today. Number 15 is a tip around your peripherals. Even when I played console, I still used a monitor, but I sat really far away. Now your eye doctor would probably smack me for this, so I'll leave this to you, but when I switched to PC, I realized how much better I played when I was closer to the monitor with it tilted a little bit. Now you don't have to touch your nose to the screen or anything like that, but for perspective, my chest is about 20 inches away from the monitor. I mentioned that I like to tilt it. Well, that's because I find with my eye level being in the upper third of the screen, I have a lot more control over my aim when I'm looking downward a little bit, and I like to keep the screen perpendicular to where I'm looking, so that's why I end up tilting the monitor like this. Moving on, we have tip number 16. I mentioned crosshair placement earlier, and that brings us to the statement of playing with intention. It's kind of a vague set of words, but it's truly the best way to describe it from my buddy Pattycakes. Try to be mindful of what you're doing and always think of what the plan of action is around it. Maybe you're throwing a grenade at someone. What's the play? Are you going to slide in while the nade is on its way as well so that you can finish them quickly once it hits them? Maybe you're sliding into a lane to engage someone. Well, do you know how many people there are? Do you know if you can get back to cover? Maybe you're holding a lane with a sniper. What's your opponent's skill level? Has their movement been pretty good up until that point? Because if so, maybe you should actually place your crosshair lower down because they're probably going to be sliding when they challenge you. Tip number 17. If you pay attention to people's clips on YouTube, or maybe you're just watching them on Twitch, a lot of players, especially on the higher end, tend to shake their aim right before they go into a slide or they engage into another gunfight. Intuitively, you'd think this is bad. Like, why would you ever shake your crosshair right before going into another fight, right? Well, the reason is twofold. Number one is it actually helps give your character a little bit of like momentum and get into the slide easier from what feels like a standstill. And then number two is going to make me sound like a bit of a boomer, but it's something called the ogre twitch. And this is something from ages ago back on Xbox where you really had to recalibrate your joystick all the time. Your reticle would actually get stuck sometimes with respect to where your joystick was. And so people just naturally got into the habit of doing this after it was kind of coined that term of the ogre twitch. This was all a long time ago back with Halo and is no longer necessary, obviously, but a lot of people tend to do it, and even I do. It just helps me feel like I'm still in a rhythm. Give it a shot and let me know what you think. Number 18 is a little tip around using your barricade or rift as a bait. In the last video I made, I explained the direct one-on-one bait technique with the Titan barricade, but today I'm talking mostly a subtle information bait. Often when people see the edges of a rift around a corner, or maybe it's a barricade, even at the highest level, they'll typically call out to their team that you're right there in that spot. Well, this baiting trick isn't something I recommend doing non-stop or anything, but sometimes I'll put it there and immediately back up, challenging from a different angle. It's sort of like that whole predict what they think you're going to do and then do something else. Well, I've done it a lot on Endless Veil where I'll put it right here on the corner and then quickly backslide and start challenging from a slightly different angle. Oh yeah, tip number 19, the one about the golf swing. I'm throwing myself under the bus here because it's actually bad to focus on too many things at once. And here I am giving you a video with 20 tips for PvP or Crucible. Golf is the perfect analogy for this. Sometimes I'll know 3 to 4 things that I really need to adjust in my swing. Maybe it's the grip, the amount of my hip rotation, or the ball placement. But many trainers in my past have actually helped me realize that I should never pick more than 2 things to fix at once. I've applied this concept to video games and never looked back. I always pick 2 things that I really need to work on in PvP, and I'll just do those things over and over and over until they become natural before I start adjusting a million other tips. Okay, our final tip, number 20, you can actually turn your music off. That way it's not distracting you in game. I know a lot of people like it, but at the end of a round that you need to clutch, the last thing you need is for music to be taking the attention away from your brain. Alright, that one was kind of weak, but I did give more than 20 in my last video, so if you want to click on the thumbnail to check that one out, I highly recommend it, and I'll see you later if you sub.